All right, everybody. Hi, it's Professor Cooper again for data visualization. I'm going to talk about transitioning and transforming your data from wide form into long form. This is useful in a wide variety of situations, pun intended. I'm going to work with the World Income Inequality Database here for a minute. This is something that I use a lot in my assignments. It's an excellent database. It's got lots of structure to it, so you can use it for lots of different things. Plus, it's an important database, so it's good to know the data. All right, so I've already loaded the data, and so if we glimpse it, we can see all of these different variables that are available to you. And we're going to work with, so you can see Gini reported is usually the key metric for income inequality, but I'm going to focus on these Qs or these D variables, and I'm going to focus on the Qs today. These represent quintiles and deciles, and essentially they represent the proportion of the income in a country held by that particular quintile of the population. So Q1 is the lower 20%. Q2 is the second quintile, or the 20th to the 21st, 20.01 to the 40th, and so on and so forth, right? So we're breaking it into bins of the population into bins of 20%. And we're saying what proportion of the total income in a country is held by that quintile of the population. And you can see the lower quintiles tend to be lower and the highest quintile tends to be very high. And so this is another metric, another way of looking at things like income inequality. All right, so we're going to work with those. And what I'm going to do is we're going to transition the data from wide form to long form. Long form is sort of synonymous in this case, at least in the tidyverse, with tidy data, in the sense that tidy data conceptually refers to every row in a data frame or a data set being an observation and every column being a variable. And that's exactly what long form of data is. You sometimes will receive a data set and it will have different observations of a single respondent, let's say, or a subject in different columns representing different time points. And in the data set, it looks like different variables across different columns. Well, in this case, the conceptual notion is going to be that we have these quintile variables in different columns. And what we want to do is we want to have them, I'm going to go ahead and add a head so this makes more sense for you to look at. So see, here's the head of the data set, and across here we have Q1 through Q5 as separate variables. Now, conceptually, they may not actually be separate variables. It's arguable that the proportion of income, or the percentage of income, in this case, is the one variable, and then the other is which quintile are you in, right? So conceptually, quintile is a variable, and then percent of income is a variable. So we can make that argument, and so it would require some restructuring of the data where all of those quintiles, the categories here that I've got highlighted, go into one variable, and the values underneath all go into one variable. These all the way down. So we have one new variable called quintile that's just the categories, maybe. and then one new called percent or value or something like that that represents the actual values. This is what we're going to actually do. What ends up happening as a result is, if you can imagine, the data set gets multiplied, in this case, by a length of 5, and you've got country, so you've got Afghanistan 2008, you see, Afghanistan 2008, 5 times in separate observations, because each quintile is now considered a separate observation of the same country in the same year. So that's what we're going to do. This is really useful for visualization, and this is very useful for certain kinds of statistical treatments. All right. So there are 2 tidyverse sets of functions here that are useful for this. One of them is sort of dying on the vine. I'm going to talk about that one very fast, and then we're going to move on to the one that is new and fresh. The one that used to work all the time and still works, but is being deprecated as we speak, is gather, and its antonym is spread. So if you want to reverse this process, you would have used the spread function. And the 2 arguments in gather were key and value. Now they still work. I just ran it. It still works. It hasn't died on the vine just yet. But here's how it works. So we're in the WID data set. You call the gather function. You set the key for what the categories, so the new categorical variable is going to be the key, and it's going to take from the column names of the variables that you were using. And in quotes, I'm giving the new, what the new variable name is going to be. So quintile is going to be the new variable name, and it's going to have Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5 for Afghanistan 2008, and so on and so forth. The other variable that will be created will be called percent, and this is the values from inside the variables. And so these become one variable. All these data down here become the other variable. And then the last thing we do is we specify exactly which variables from the original data set we are compressing, transforming into new variables. Everything else is just going to get copied 5 times, if that makes sense. All right. So I'm going to run it. I'm selecting down here. I'm just rearranging everything so you can see the final result. This is not necessary, but since we'll be in Tibble world, if I don't do this, the new variables will go to the end, and then we'll have to go search for it. Okay. So I'm arranging and selecting just for our visual purposes, not because I have to. So gather and spread. Gather here is the only thing that matters. Okay. So we run it, and let's go to the top. There are a lot of, as you can see, there are a lot of variables, very useful variables in this data set. All right. Country, year, I arranged by that, and I selected all these things to be in front. Genie reported, and here's the new quintile variable that was created. And now you see all those quintiles have disappeared. They are now in a column, and percent is a column. And so Q1 for Afghanistan 2008 got pushed to here. Q2 for Afghanistan 2008 got pushed to here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty much it. And if you can wrap your head around that, it's a very powerful tool. And also, I should remind you that I just told you the old version. The newer version is pivot longer or pivot wider. And there are only slight differences here. Here's the exact same thing that I just did, but I switched to the new function, pivot longer. The argument names, these specifications here, the argument names change slightly, but they're pretty much the same. So values to is the same as value up here, so percent. names to, meaning the names from the original variables will now go to the quintile variable and become the new categories. And then I'm still doing Q1 through Q5. Now, you can see I slightly did something different. I was just breaking lines with commas here, but the code is exactly the same. So the only thing I changed was the name of the function and slight different arguments. All right. Run it. Does exactly the same thing. And that's it. So this is a very useful tool. This is a very useful function. This is especially useful if you work a lot with panel data, because you have to flip back and forth between wide and long form a lot when you're working with panel data. So I hope this was a helpful video. For those of you in my class, this will help you complete some of your assignments. For those of you not in my class, I hope it helps you learn something. All right, great. See ya.